Greetings, my fellow tacticians. I am Doodleman149, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be diving back into the brutal universe of Warhammer 40K Tacticus. Today I decided to look at every single faction in the game, barring a couple who haven't quite finished yet, and seeing just how well these factions synergize with themselves. You can think of it as a little bit of a guide to figure out which faction may work best for you in a faction wars version of the tournament arena. We've got 18 factions in total, with at least 5 characters in each at the moment, so it will be a doozy. Grab your bolter and let's get started. But before we begin, I figure I'll throw a little ad in here from a merch store and Patreon. The ads of the past were a little long-winded, so basically, if you like what I do here and want to support me, I've got a link to both my merch shop and my Patreon down below. The clothes from my store are really comfy. I really like my Doodle Fan tank top, and for a more practical way of supporting me, my paid Patreon is just $1, and it gets you exclusive videos and such over there, so it might be worth checking out. So, moving on. But before we start breaking down these grimdark factions, let me take a minute to explain exactly what synergy is, just in case some of you got this far and you just have no idea what I will be covering today. Synergy describes the interaction of elements, substances, or organizations to produce a combined effect greater than the sum of their individual contributions. Or, in more basic terms, it's generally how well does a faction work together and complement the members within it. You'll see what I mean in just a minute in case you're still confused. Another point of note here, I am not a whale, so I do not own every single character within these factions. However, based on what I can glean from their abilities, I can figure out how well they work together still. The Ultramarines are the quintessential Space Marine chapter, known for their disciplined, adaptable, and tactically brilliant combat style, guided by the Codex Astartes written by their Primarch Rabute Guilliman. Clad in iconic blue power armor, they serve as the sword and shield of the Imperium, governing their own vast empire Ultramar, and are considered the model for all other Space Marine chapters. Looking at the characters we have available for the boys in blue, we have Vero Tigurius, their chief librarian, Certus, their eliminator sergeant, Bellator, their interceptor sergeant, Incius, their apothecary, Marnius Calgar, their chapter master, and Demetrian Titus, the protagonist of Space Marine 2. All of these characters, as can be expected, are fairly well rounded in terms of stats, with Bellator, Incius, Titus, and Calgar being particularly tanky, while Tigurius and Certus are on the squishier side. In terms of abilities, there are a few that mesh within the group. Psychic Fortress, Tigurius' passive ability, increases the block chance for adjacent friendlies by 50%. The amount blocked is honestly a paltry sum, but this ability also reduces incoming psychic damage for those adjacent allies by almost twice the block damage. Given Psychers have relatively low damage output as is, given their attacks are unblockable, this can heavily hamper a Psyker-heavy team. Certus' active can assist in moving enemies into a formation to allow for Tigurius' active ability to hit as many units as possible, so that's a nice little bonus that I didn't honestly think of. Bellator doesn't really work together directly with other units, though. On the flip side, the active of Incius heals Imperials for much more than it does other organics. His passive of reviving the first adjacent unit who is not overkilled works really well with Titus' passive of not being able to be overkilled and doing a retaliatory attack. If that attack kills an enemy, he is revived. If not, then he dies. However, in this instance, if he was the first to go down, then Incius would just revive him anyway, even if his retaliatory attack did not kill an opponent. This makes him highly durable. Lastly, we have Calgar, whose passive just flat out increases the damage of adjacent Imperial units, which obviously works well with all the Ultramarines. Before doing this analysis, I was expecting much worse, but there's a lot of ways the Ultramarines work really well together, which I guess from a lore perspective is not surprising. The Black Legion is the largest and most feared legion of Chaos Space Marines and are led by Abaddon the Despoiler. Originally, the Emperor's Luna Wolves, later renamed the Sons of Horus, they betrayed the Imperium during the Horus Heresy, but fractured after their defeat. Under Abaddon, they reformed in the Eye of Terror, becoming an inclusive force of varied traitors united against the Imperium, known for their martial skills, tactical flexibility, and constant attacks, including numerous Black Crusades. Looking at their characters, we have for Abaddon's Chosen, we have Angrax, their Terminator champion. Keep an eye out for a future video about who the best Terminator is. Volk, their Obliterator, Archimados, their Master of Possession, Harken World Claimer, their Herald of the Apocalypse, and Abaddon the Despoiler himself. Surprisingly, damage output and health seem to be lacking with this faction. Aside from Angrax and Harken, none of them have impressive health values. Angrax is the only one with good armor, and only Harken and Abaddon have decent damage output. Looking at their abilities, there's really only one that works with anyone, and that's Abaddon's passive, First Amongst Traitors, which increases the damage of friendly Chaos units within 2 hexes by a flat amount. Additional damage buffs can also be gained for each turn in which Abaddon attacked, up to a max of 13 attacks. Plus, there's their Let the Galaxy Burn trait for all the Black Legion that gives them a chance to spawn Despoiled Ground on an attack, and to land an extra hit if the target is standing on a hex with an active hex effect. So not really working together so much as it is just randomly an opportunistic time to hit enemies. The Black Legion, despite being made of various traitor legions working together, doesn't actually work together all that well. The Death Guard are a traitor Space Marine legion loyal to the Chaos God Nurgle, the god of decay and disease. Once a loyal legion known for its resilience in war, they became Nurgle's favorite children during the Horus Heresy. Now they are undying, rotten warriors who embody pestilence, using plagues and decay to slowly and inevitably grind down their enemies in an unending, gruesome war of attrition. Looking at the characters we have for Nurgle's Nasty Boys, we have Typhus, Herald of the Plague God, Malletus, their Blight Lord Champion, Nauseous Rotbone, their Plague Surgeon, Pestilion, their Biologus Putrefier, and Corrodius, their Noxious Blightbringer. Keeping with their lore, everyone here is tanky and slow, so they can take and dish out a lot of punishment, but they may have trouble reaching their targets. In terms of abilities, Typhus and Malletus don't really bring anything to the table for their allies. Rotbone is basically a Chaos version of Insius in that he heals Chaos units for more than other units, while not healing Imperials at all with his active ability. He also has the possibility, unlike Insius, to revive adjacent Chaos units even if they're overkilled. Although, instead of the 100% of Insius, it's only a 75% chance for Rotbone. Pestilion has a nice active buff that gives all Chaos allies in his Contagion Aura, which is a sphere of influence that reduces the armor of enemies and a sphere that expands over time, some additional toxic damage to their attacks. On top of that, his passive adds blast damage to adjacent Chaos melee and ranged attacks. He's a unit that I feel is severely underappreciated as a support character. Corrodius' contribution is a movement speed buff in his passive for those in his Contagion Aura. This is great, as the Death Guard is notoriously slow, so this helps to mitigate their biggest weakness. With a few absences, there's a good amount of synergy with the Death Guard. The Tau Empire is a technologically advanced, expansionist alien empire driven by their philosophy of the greater good, where all beings work together for collective benefit. This young humanoid species uses diplomacy and trade to win allies, but will resort to military conquest to spread their unified vision across the galaxy. Known for their sophisticated weaponry and reliance on ranged firepower, the Tau are a unique force of relatively benign outsiders in the galaxy's grim darkness, incorporating diverse allied species into their expanding stellar empire. Looking at the characters we have for the Guardians of the Greater Good, we have Shosil, their Firesight marksman and best sniper in the game. See the link below for that video. Revis, their XV8 crisis battlesuit. Darkstrider, their sub-commander. On-Shi, their ethereal. And Shadowsun, the supreme commander of the Tau Empire. Many of these characters suffer from close combat weakness, which makes their attacks less effective, but they all have a very high damage output in general with a good balance of squishier and tankier units. Looking at their abilities, the Tau are probably one of the best synergized factions out there. Shosil and Darkstrider are both capable of adding marker lights to targets they hit with ranged attacks. A marker light will increase the damage done to the marked unit by 15% when attacked by any Tau ranged unit, which is most of them. The drones that Shosil and Revis summon also have the Savior Protocol passive, which has them taking half the damage meant for their friendly adjacent unit, essentially blocking them with their own robot bodies. Darkstrider's active can remove close combat weakness for adjacent friendlies for 1 turn while adding marker lights to adjacent hostiles, perfect for getting the melee weak Tau out of harm's way and getting those ranged attacks in. On-Shi provides buffs that change on the turn, and while it normally only affects adjacent units, it's able to affect friendly Tau units within 2 hexes instead, essentially giving ranged buffs to the Tau. The same goes for Shadowsun's passive, which boosts damage to any Tau within 2 hexes of her or her command drone, while also giving affected allies a 25% chance for an additional hit for each turn that Shadowsun has been in the field, which is an excellent boost for the very strong single shots of Shosil and his drones. All in all, the Tau synergize very well with each other. The Tyranids are an extragalactic predatory alien swarm driven by a psychic Jesselt consciousness called the Hive Mind to consume all organic life in the galaxy. Comprised of a vast array of biological horrors, including living starships, they strip planets bare to fuel their rapid adaptation and reproduction, leaving behind only desolate, airless husks. Their goal is the ultimate assimilation of all biomass, making them an extinction-level threat with whom no negotiations are possible. Looking at the characters we have for the Hungry Hive Mind, we have the Neurothrope, their psychic organism, the Tyrant Guard, their guardian organism, the Winged Prime, their lead warrior organism, the Death Leaper, their vanguard organism, and the Parasite of Mortrex, their invader organism. With the notable exception of the Tyrant Guard, to the lesser extent the Winged Prime, most of the Nids are fairly soft with high damage outputs. They also have 2 summoners who can essentially do infinite summons if the conditions are correct. Looking at their abilities, the biggest way the Tyranids synergize is through their Synapse connection. Synapse is an aura around a Synapse unit that extends for 2 hexes and prevents the effects of instinctive behavior and battle fatigue, which mostly affects summons. The 3 units to generate this Synapse field are the Neurothrope, Winged Prime, and the Parasite of Mortrex. Within this Synapse range, the Tyrant Guard's passive, Guardian Organism, is activated, which allows for itself and any units affected by its big target trait to ignore a good percentage of damage coming its way. The active ability of the Guard, Crushing Claws, also pairs well with the Neurothrope's active, Spirit Leech, and its passive, Neuroparasite. Spirit Leech lets the Neurothrope deal a decent amount of damage to a target and heal itself and adjacent Nids for 50% of the damage dealt. This damage output is pretty much doubled if the target is suppressed, and Crushing Claws suppresses a target. Neuroparasite levels are also boosted whenever the affected target is hit by a psychic or suppressing attack as well. The Synapse trait also works really well for the Winged Prime, since its active ability, Alpha Warrior, allows for a Tyranid Warrior to be summoned on any hex within Synapse range. The Tyranid Warrior itself also then projects a Synapse range. The Winged Prime's passive, called Synaptic Linchpin, can summon a Hormigaunt adjacent to a target that was attacked and not killed by other Synapse units. This means whenever the Winged Prime, Neurothrope, Parasite, or Warrior attacks a target, another Chaff Tyranid is spawned in to continue piling on the damage. For the Death Leaper, I initially thought it didn't synergize all that well, but remembering the Neuroparasite, both the active, Fear of the Unseen, and the passive, Feeder Tendrils of the Death Leaper suppress targets, which then helps the Neuroparasite to grow within a target, giving the Neuroparasite greater damage output. In addition to this, the active of the Parasite, It Itches, also suppresses targets, so almost every Tyranid works to make the Neurothrope's attacks a lot more powerful. Not surprising, but it seems the faction to have a hive mind works really well together. The Adepta Sororitas, or Sisters of Battle, are an all-female military order within the Ecclesiarchy, serving as the religious arm's fighting force to eradicate heresy and corruption through unwavering faith and righteous violence, utilizing powerful close-range firepower and miraculous combat feats to protect the Imperium of Man. Known for their holy fervor and the unyielding loyalty to the Emperor, they are formidable warriors, often blending religious devotion with advanced weaponry and armored vehicles on the battlefield. In terms of characters for the Sisters of Battle, we have Vindicta, their Celestian, Isabella, their Hospitalier, Morvenval, the Abbess Sanctorum of the Adepta Sororitas, Roswitha, their Canoness, and the Living Saint Celestine. In general, their stats appear to be quite average, but it's their abilities that help each unit shine. Speaking of their abilities, there is not a single solitary ability within this faction that synergizes with the rest of the units. The closest thing there is happens to be the Active Faith trait that they all have that boosts crit chance and boosts it further each time a friendly Imperial, not even a Sister of Battle, either dies or defeats an enemy. This increased crit chance is reset upon a crit being achieved. Isabella's active, Rites of Restoration, allows for the resurrection of Imperial units and one Imperial character, but again, that's only non-mechanical Imperial, not specifically the Sororitas. I'm surprised to report that this faction has literally zero synergy. The Necrons are an ancient robot-like Xenos race comprised of living metal bodies and mindless, soulless automatons that were once a mortal species known as the Necron tier. They achieved immortality by sacrificing their souls for soulless mechanical forms through a process called biotransference, which they used to wage war against their enemies, the Old Ones. After conquering the galaxy, they retreated into deep sleep within their tomb worlds for millions of years and are now reawakening to reclaim their ancient empire and purge all organic life, wielding advanced technology and relentless firepower. Looking at the units we have for the Robo-Egyptians, we have Makatep, their Royal Warden, Immospec, their Hexmark Destroyer, Aleph Null, their Canoptic Spider, Tutmos, their Plasma Lancer, and Anafit, their Overlord. Overall, this faction probably needs a rework, since they're pretty weak in every aspect aside from 3 characters having attacks with good pierce ratios, and Aleph Null being one of the best mechanical medics in the game. Looking at their abilities, both of Makatep's abilities synergize well with the other Necrons. Relentless March, his passive, not only heals adjacent friendly mechanical units at the start of each turn, which all Necrons are, but it also gives those units a +1 to their movement range. His active ability, Adaptive Strategy, however, allows for summons adjacent to him to be affected by Relentless March and to immediately take a move and attack, if possible. This meshes really well with Aleph Null's Scarab Swarm summons and Anafit's Necron Warrior summons. Immospec, however, is kind of off on his own in terms of synergy. His Overwatch is very powerful with a great damage boost from his passive and a good pierce ratio, but he just doesn't do anything particularly special with his other Robo-Egyptian buddies. Aleph Null is a great synergizer in that he's a flying repair unit that not only has his active repair, but his passive, Fabricator Claw Array, also repairs a random friendly unit after Aleph moves or after his turn is ended. His active, Scarab Hive, is the summoning of Scarab Swarms, which, as previously stated, works really well with Makatep. Tutmos is similar to Immospec in that he doesn't really synergize all that well. He's also more damage focused, but his ability to fly can be further bolstered by Makatep to allow him to get good vantage points over the enemy, something that Immospec can struggle with. Lastly, there's Anafet, who, as previously mentioned, can summon Necron Warriors up to a max of 6, one for each turn that has occurred, with his active ability, Resurrection Orb. In general, Makatep is the linchpin of the synergy of the Necrons. Outside of his abilities, none of the other Necrons really build off each other. The Astra Militarum, also known as the Imperial Guard, is the primary fighting force of the Imperium of Man, comprising billions of unaugmented ordinary human soldiers who fight with overwhelming numbers and firepower. They are a versatile, well-supplied army that provides essential support for other Imperial forces, including the Space Marines, by holding vast battle lines and occupying planets. Looking at the characters we have for the Imperial Guard, we have Sybil Divine, their Primaris Psyker, Commissar Yarrick, the Hero of Armageddon, Kut Skoden, their Bulgrin Bonehead, Thaddeus Noble, their Master of Ordnance, and Castellan Creed, the Lord General of the Astra Militarum. This is Future Doodle here. After I recorded this, they dropped a new Imperial Guard character who is the Death Corps of Creed Cavalryman. From the abilities I've seen, he can summon units when he charges as his active ability, and his passive ability has him heal for a whole bunch of health at the end of his turn. So again, doesn't really synergize with the other characters. In all, this faction is pretty weak in terms of health, and honestly damage output is pretty low as well, with Kut being a notable tank and Thaddeus being the notable damage dealer. Looking at their abilities, their only synergy lies in the summons between Yarrick and Creed. Yarrick's passive, Summary Execution, can boost the damage of any Cadian guardsman on the field, and his active, Send in the Next Wave, can summon a minimum of 2 guardsmen with 1 more for each defeated friendly unit up to a max of 4 at level 35. Creed, on the other hand, can summon even more guardsmen with his active, Supreme Commander, and acts as a relentless march of sorts by allowing all guardsmen to take a turn with his active. So basically, best case scenario is Yarrick summons 4 guardsmen, Creed summons some more, and they all take a turn. In a point of contention for me, the passive for Thaddeus Noble is a major missed opportunity. His passive buffs the damage of heavy weapons characters within 2 hexes. Now this works really great for mixed faction teams like putting him with Calandus and Malgan Ra, but the most comical part is that none of the Astra Militarum units are heavy weapons characters, so it's kind of a waste. The Orkz are a brutal and relentless race, driven by their insatiable love for violence, combat, and destruction. These green-skinned Xenos are savage, resilient, and wildly unpredictable, making them both a formidable and amusing presence in the galaxy. In terms of Orc characters, we have Snotflaga, their runt herd, Gibbascraps, their big mech boy, Snapareka is their grot killacan, Tank Smasha is their knob on a smasha squig, and Boss Golgorts is their war boss in mega armor. As anyone who has played against them in Faction Wars will tell you, the Orcs are all about damage output, with a few of them even being surprisingly tanky. Looking at their abilities, they have a few things to note. One is their shared trait of Get Stuck In. This trait is described as, for every 2 hits this unit scores against an enemy within range 2, it has a 30% chance to score an additional hit. If 2 or more friendly Orcs are adjacent to the target, that chance rises to 100%. Essentially, if you crowd a single target with Orcs, your Orcs will deal more hits and thus more damage to it. basically ganging up on the target for extra Daka. And speaking of Daka, Give a Scraps and Snapareka work decently well together in that Snap's active ability, Daka Daka Daka, increases its hits up to a max of 16 for each time he is repaired in battle. Seeing as Give a Scraps is the repairman, this can easily be cheesed to max the damage output for this ability. Other than that, Golgortz has another universal synergy with his underlings in that his active, Awag, summons 2 Orc Boys, further engaging the Get Stuck In trait, adds 1 movement to all Orcs, and increases the damage of all Orcs while also giving them all an extra hit. An extra hit that stacks on top of Get Stuck In. This can essentially let an Orc team bum rush the enemy and just wipe them out with overwhelming force and mobility in a single turn. While they don't have the largest quantity of synergies, the ones the Orcs have can easily be a contender for being the strongest. The Black Templars are the zealous and unyielding Space Marine chapter of the Imperium of Man, defined by their fanatical faith in the Emperor and their commitment to an unending crusade against the enemies of humanity, such as heretics, mutants, and Xenos. As a second founding chapter of the Imperial Fist, they eschew a fixed homeworld and instead operate from a massive fleet, waging a perpetual war of retribution across the galaxy. Known for their knightly warrior monk aesthetic and their rejection of psychers in favor of unshakable faith. In terms of the glorious warriors of the Black Templars, they have the absolute powerhouse of Sword Brother Godswill, Burchard, their aggressor sergeant, Chapter Ancient Thoriad, the Emperor's champion Brother Jaeger, and High Marshal Helbrecht. Every single one of these units hits hard and can take their lumps as well, with the minor exception of Helbrecht. They're also almost an exclusively melee-focused faction aside from Burchard and Helbrecht. Looking at their abilities, there are a number of synergies that focus around Thoriad and Helbrecht to a lesser degree. Let's look at Thoriad first. His passive, Astartes Banner, is easily one of the strongest in the game, as it allows any friendly unit within 2 hexes to score an additional melee hit with a damage cap based on level. While this isn't exclusive to the Black Templars, where it really shines through is through mitigating the singular weakness of Godswill, and that being that his attack only has 1 hit. This can, at the proper levels, essentially double the damage output of who is already the strongest single-hit character in the game. This ability also works on Jaeger's passive that sees him preemptively strike opponents who attack him in melee range. Thoriad's active, Unbreakable Duty, also massively boosts his stats should 2 of his brothers fall, which really makes him into a sleeper threat. Moving on to Helbrecht, both of his abilities, while situational, synergize really well with his brothers to make them all the more effective. His active, Crusade of Wrath, boosts melee damage and adds Pierce to all melee attacks for this turn and the next. This is important because most of the attacks of the Black Templar are power, which is a respectable damage model but still on the lower side. At level 35, Helbrecht's ability drives that Pierce ratio up from the usual 40% all the way up to 62%, allowing his brothers to even more easily punch through enemy armor. His passive, Destroy the Witch, also allows for friendly adjacent units to deal increased melee damage to Psychers, which, combined with his active, basically deletes a Psyker team. Same with the Orcs, there's not a lot of synergy, but what there is incredibly strong, in the right hands of course. The Aeldari are a technologically advanced, psychic, long-lived alien race resembling elves who once ruled the galaxy, but their decadence led to the birth of the Chaos God Slanesh and the shattering of their empire. Now fragmented into several groups like the Craftworld Aeldari, they are a dying race fighting for survival using advanced psychic and technological weaponry, specializing in fast, hard-hitting units with extreme tactical flexibility. Looking at the Space Elves, we have Calandus, their Ranger, Ithana, their Autarch, Eldaron, their Farseer, Malgan Ra, the Dark Reaper Phoenix Lord, and Jane Zar, the Phoenix Lord of the Howling Banshees. In all, the Eldar are incredibly soft defensively, with some good high pierce ratio damage models to compensate for this. Just do not be surprised when the only Phoenix Lord to have never died goes down harder than a sack of bricks when pressured. Looking at their abilities, the synergies of the Eldar lie entirely on the shoulders of Ithana and Eldaron. Ithana's passive, Path of Command, increases the damage and crit chance of friendlies within 2 hexes, with increased bonuses specifically for the Eldar, and Eldaron's Doom passive just buffs damage across units that are exactly 2 hexes away from him. Their damage buffs can stack to single out and eliminate potent threats. However, as I previously mentioned, the best synergy is actually when paired with Thaddeus Noble to buff both Malgan Ra and Calandus, but that's not exactly the focus of this video. Their synergies are decent for the most part, but they are lacking both the quantity and quality of others we've already looked at. These Space Wolves are a fiercely independent and highly aggressive loyalist Space Marine chapter known for their ferocity, honor, and primal nature, blending the might of genetically enhanced super soldiers with the savage spirit of their homeworld Fenris. They value personal glory and loyalty to their pact, often operating outside the Imperial command structures, and are identifiable by their wolf motifs, their ancient gene seeds connection to the beast-like Wolfen, and their use of powerful rune priests who channel spiritual power instead of the psychic warp. Looking at the characters on offer for the Space Wolves, we have Ulf, their Wolfen pack leader, Jark, their Hound of Morkai pack leader, Arjak, the champion of the Great Wolf, Njal, the Lord of Runes, and Ragnar, Wolf Lord of the Black Manes. Aside from Njal, who just sucks in every single way, the Wolves are all more geared towards damage output, with Arjak being the notable tank. Looking at their abilities, aside from Jark's passive, Hunters Beyond Death just flat out reducing the damage output of enemy psychers, the only synergy really comes from Ragnar. His active ability, War Howl, gives every melee-only character the Unstoppable trait, which really only benefits him and Jark, while also boosting crit chance and general damage for normal melee attacks for one turn. His passive, Saga of the Warrior Reborn, also sees him deliver 2 extra hits to an enemy if he charges them, and if he defeated an enemy character this match, this passive also applies to all the other Space Wolves. Ragnar, like Makatep, is really the core for the synergy of the Wolves. In all, their synergy is pretty weak. The Dark Angels are a secretive, ancient loyalist Space Marine chapter driven by the burden of a 10,000-year-old betrayal during the Horus Heresy known as the Fallen. They are known for their knightly aesthetic, formidable specialized weapon companies like the Bone White Deathwing and the Black Armored Ravenwing, and their ongoing hidden quest to hunt down the traitors who abandoned their Primarch, Lionel Johnson. Looking at the characters for the Dark Angels, we have Azrael, their Chapter Master, Sarkael, their Hailblaster Sergeant, Asmodai, their Master of Repentance, Barakiel, their Deathwing Terminator, and Forcus, the Inner Circle Champion. Most of their stats are middle of the road, if not above average, with Barakiel and surprisingly Azrael being the tanks of the faction, while Sarkael, Asmodai, and Forcus do a lot of the damage. The focus is also surprisingly Overwatch heavy. Looking at their abilities, Azrael, being the Chapter Master, has a really good passive ability, Lion's Helm, that increases Overwatch damage, damage blocked, and blocked chance for Dark Angels within 2 hexes. This is great for making the Dark Angels potentially tankier while also buffing their Overwatch heavy team. Both of Sarkael's abilities synergize really well with the other Dark Angels. His active, Supercharge, has him hit up to 3 enemies with an overcharged plasma shot that has a 20% increased pierce ratio to all targets hit. After this attack, any others that deal plasma damage, such as Sarkael's passive, Azrael's ranged attack, or Barakiel's active, they will all have that 20% increased pierce ratio as well. This means that all those attacks then have an 85% pierce ratio, which is nuts. Speaking of Sarkael's passive, Grim Retribution, if Sarkael is not adjacent to an enemy and either he or an adjacent Dark Angel is attacked and the attacker is within range 3, then Sarkael fires off a retaliatory shot against them. This counts as Overwatch, but will still trigger again even if Overwatch has already been triggered for that turn. Basically, it can fire after Overwatch, but Overwatch cannot fire after Grim Retribution. Even Asmodai, who I find to be arguably the worst Dark Angel, is pretty synergistic with his allies. His active ability, Exemplar of Hate, has all friendly Overwatch or melee attacks deal increased damage against a single target, and if that target is Chaos, then he or the next closest Dark Angel immediately performs a normal attack against that target. This can work really well for shutting down a charging Wog Golgorts in Faction Wars, and it also allows for Sarkael to put even more damage out. If Sarkael uses his active on a Chaos unit, then Barakiel and Azrael use their Plasma on it, followed by Asmodai using his active, a lot of damage can be pumped into a Heretic. His passive, Feared Interrogator, also synergizes because it increases his damage based on enemies that are suppressed or adjacent to another Dark Angel. Since Azrael's active, Dark Talon Strike, also suppresses enemies, this works well in Asmodai's favor. Barakiel's only unmentioned synergy, since I've already talked about his active being used against plasma-burned enemies, is his passive ability called Deathwing. Deathwing increases Barakiel's block damage and his outgoing damage for each time he has blocked damage during an attack. This effect lasts for 1 round and is doubled against Chaos enemies or when Barakiel is standing next to other Dark Angels. Lastly is Orkz, whose default strike stance leaves him in Overwatch, gaining all those bonuses from Azrael and Asmodai as I mentioned earlier. His passive, Enmity for the Unworthy, has him dealing increased damage percentage for nearby friendlies with an additional flat damage increase for each adjacent Dark Angel, meaning if you cluster your team around Orkz, he does the most damage. In all, the Dark Angels have some of the largest, most potent, and most varied synergies in the entire game. Now, before I move on, if you want to take a break here, that is perfectly fine because, oh boy, look at that clock. We have been here a long time. Thanks for making it this far, and hopefully, if you do get to take a break, you'll come back for the remainder. If you want to keep pushing on, though, let's get into the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Adeptus Mechanicus are a techno-religious faction of the Imperium of Man, responsible for maintaining and producing the Empire's vast industrial and military technology, with their followers worshipping the machine god and replacing their biological parts with cybernetics. Based on the Forge world of Mars, they are a highly independent, technologically advanced organization that fiercely guards its knowledge and practices rigid dogma and tradition. Taking a look at its barely human servants of the Omnissiah, we have Vitruvius, their tech priest Dominus, Actus, their tech priest Manipulus, Ten Geda, their Skitarii marshal, Exeter Ro, their Sicarian Ruststalker princeps, and Sygex, their Cataphron destroyer. Most of the Mechanicus harness the enhanced technology to deal heavy damage to enemies while being fairly average in other areas. Looking at their abilities, immediately Vitruvius synergizes really well with every other unit. His active, Rad Bombardment, drops a line of toxic damage attacks that leave hexes contaminated, which reduces the armor of organic units standing on them. This hex effect works really well in Tangeda's Conqueror Imperative stance, which increases damage dealt to units that have reduced armor. Vitruvius' passive, Master Annihilator, basically does the same thing as Thoriad's passive by adding an additional hit to a target that was hit by Vitruvius' ranged attack. This also stacks with Thoriad's passive, so they're a good interfaction combo. Actus also has really good synergies by being a medic. Any mechanical unit repaired by him, whether they need heals or not, including those affected by his AoE healed active, will immediately perform an attack against an enemy unit within range. This particularly stacks well with Tangeda's Control Edict, which either allows for an additional attack to summon another Skitarii, or it allows all affected units near Tan to attack a single target. Actus is just a great pairing with the entirety of the Mechanicus. I've already mentioned all the ways that Tangeda synergizes with a team. Sygex just gains the benefits from all the previously mentioned abilities, but doesn't really add anything of his own. But Exeter Ro's passive, called Optimized Gate, has him deal additional damage to an adjacent enemy that was hit by a friendly mechanical unit. This can include all of the faction, the summoned Skitarii, and the additional attacks triggered by Actus. This allows Ro to deal tons of damage if positioned correctly. Overall, aside from Sygex, every one of the Mechanicus members works excellently together. The World Eaters are a Chaos Space Marine Legion devoted to the blood god Khorne, known for their unending bloodlust, hyper-violence, and close combat prowess. Augmented with Butcher's Nails implants to increase their aggression, they are savage berserkers who fight with chain axes and other melee weapons, seeking to spill blood and accumulate skulls for Khorne's glory. The Rage Boys have an almost exclusively melee roster consisting of Rask, their Terminator, Macer, their Jackal Dishonored, Azkor, their Exalted 8-Bound, Tarvak, their Master of Executions, and Karn, the Betrayer. They all boast very high damage across a variety of damage models, but can struggle on the defensive side of things. Looking at their abilities, there is not a ton of synergies. Rask's passive, Wrathful Devotion, gives him and adjacent Chaos units a one-turn shield every time Rask kills an enemy. This doesn't have any special bonus for World Eaters because it's just for Chaos units in general. Azkor's passive, Beacon of Rage, has him increase his damage for each time he was attacked, and when he defeats an enemy, 50% of that increased damage is also given to any adjacent Chaos units as well. This last one I'm going to mention is kind of an honorable mention, and that's Macer's passive, Skull Smasher, where he deals increased damage for every 10% of his health he has lost. This can be actively triggered by Karn's passive, where he attacks an enemy within 2 hexes once he killed an enemy in this battle, and if no enemies are nearby, he attacks an ally, so Karn could artificially boost Macer's damage through friendly fire. The synergy of the World Eaters is a bit chaotic and not really all that great, but as a faction, they're still my favorite Chaos units. The Blood Angels are a noble but tormented chapter of Space Marines, known for their beautiful angelic appearance and vampiric aesthetic, contrasting with a deep-seated genetic flaw. This flaw manifests as a bloodlust called the Red Thirst and the maddening Black Rage, where they relive their angelic Primarch Sanguinius' death in battle, often leading them to charge into enemies in a frenzy. They are elite, fast-moving warriors excelling in close combat, fighting to uphold their Primarch's ideals while battling their own inner demons. Looking at the Sons of Sanguinius, we have Matineo, their Jump Pack Intercessor Sergeant, Lucian, their Death Company Intercessor, Nicodemus, their Sanguinary Priest, Mephiston, the Lord of Death, and Dante, their Chapter Master and the oldest living Space Marine. All of these units excel at mobility and melee combat. Looking at their abilities, there's a few synergies, but they mostly focus around Nicodemus and Dante. For Dante, we'll just look at his passive, Lord of the Host, that sees friendly units with rapid assault or flying traits deal additional damage. This, oddly enough, affects every single Blood Angel, so if any affected units are at 50% or lower health, they also score an additional hit, but that plays more into the Nicodemus synergy. For Nicodemus, his active is really what activates all the synergies of the faction. His active, called Blood Chalice, sets all adjacent biological units to 50% health, giving them a 15% increase to pierce ratio to melee attacks, and causes them to heal when dealing melee attacks. Now, doing this activates several things. Being at 50% health causes Matineo's active, Hammer of Wrath, to deal double the damage. It activates Lucian's passive ability, Visions of Heresy, where he has an additional 15% pierce ratio if at 50% lower health, which stacks with his active, Black Rage, which gives even greater pierce ratio. I've already mentioned Dante's passive gets stronger with lower health, but even his active, the Light of Sanguinius, doubles its effect. This ability targets a single enemy and attacks them with melta damage, subsequently debuffing it and all surrounding units to deal a percentage less of damage. With Nicodemus' active in play, this doubles that damage reduction. Nicodemus really is the centerpiece of the Blood Angel synergy. Genestealer cults are insidious secret societies composed of genetically corrupted humans and aliens controlled by a single powerful Genestealer patriarch. These cults thrive in the shadow of the Imperium, slowly infiltrating all levels of society, prepare for a planetary uprising. Their ultimate goal is to destabilize entire worlds by orchestrating a rebellion, paving the way for the arrival of their true masters, the Tyranid hive fleets. Looking around for the disgusting cultist, we have Holland, their Biophagus, Zibia, their Magus, Isaac, their Primus, Judd, their Kellermorph, and the Pattermine, their Genestealer Patriarch. Aside from the Pattermine, all GSC members are extremely squishy, but that's by design, as they can all respawn if there's an active decoy beacon available. Looking at their abilities, they all focus on the usage of decoys, but first, one that doesn't is with Holland and his passive, Twisted Science. This makes it so that everyone Holland heals, aside from himself, gains extra health. They can also be healed regardless of whether or not they've been damaged to add Twisted Science to them. Genestealers also gain bonus damage from this buff. In a weird bit of self-synergy, Holland's active, Aberrant Hypermorph, summons a unit that not only receives the health and damage buff from Twisted Science, but it itself also has a trait that increases its damage relative to its health, making it even deadlier. Then the rest of the synergy revolves around the decoys. Ziba's passive, Spiritual Leader, generates one decoy adjacent to her at the end of her turn, and if she ends her turn near a decoy, a Neophyte Hybrid is summoned on one of the available decoys. Isaac's ability, Cult Demagogue, has him summon a number of decoys around a target and immediately spawn a number of Neophytes to attack at random. His passive, Decoys and Misdirection, also makes it so that enemies moving onto decoys take blast damage, while friendly units moving onto or resurrecting from a decoy have increased damage. If a GSC member steps onto a decoy, they gain the damage buff and then also spawn a decoy in an adjacent hex. Judd only really synergizes with her passive, Hypersensory abilities, where she leaves a decoy where she was standing after moving from taking damage. The Pattermine can take great advantage of clustered decoys. Its passive, Cosmic Horror, causes it to spawn a decoy on the hex of a unit it defeated while also healing the Pattermine if it steps onto a decoy. Its active, Might from Below, causes the Pattermine to deal psychic damage to an adjacent enemy while also having Pure Strain Genestealers spawn on each decoy adjacent to the Pattermine, including the one that can spawn from Cosmic Horror. These summons can then immediately attack this turn, but they cannot move. The Genestealers have great synergies surrounding the use of destroyable decoys, so while it can be situational, it can also be extremely strong. The final faction we come to are the Thousand Suns, a Chaos Space Marine legion devoted to Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways. Once a loyalist legion known for their deep psychic abilities, they fell to chaos after a catastrophic misunderstanding led to the destruction of their homeworld, Prospero. Their Primarch, Magnus the Red, and the Legion sorcerers sought ultimate arcane knowledge, which led them to their current form as a force of powerful mutated sorcerers and their eternally dust-encased automaton rubric marines. Looking at the birdmen and automatons of the 15th Legion, we have Yazagor, their Zangor Enlightened, Toth, their Scarab Occult Terminator, Abraxas, their Infernal Master, Tamachus, their Exalted Sorcerer, and Araman, the Architect of the Rubric. They're a psychic-heavy faction with a variety of mobilities and damage outputs. Looking at their abilities, Yaz's active, Sorcerer's Facade, allows for Yaz to move, deal additional psychic damage on top of its regular attack, then switch places with a friendly Psyker, which could be everyone else but Toth. His passive, Reality Unbound, gives him extra movement, range, and psychic damage if 3 or more enemies have taken psychic damage, which again is easy with the rest of the faction. Toth's active, Hellfire Missile Rack, is really his only synergy, as it allows him to deal heavy round damage to every unit on the field that took psychic damage this turn, including the initial target again. This is, of course, very easy to spread damage with given the number of Psykers in the faction. Abraxas has the most synergy with his active, Malefic Maelstrom, summoning a pink horror and a free adjacent hex that can immediately attack. This turn, any enemy that is dealt psychic damage causes a Screamer to spawn next to Abraxas. This pairs very well with Yaz's active, where Abraxas can do his summons, giving him potentially 6 demons, having Yaz swap places with him, and then letting Tamachus and Araman deal more psychic damage and start the spawning of more demons at the new location. It's a great way to effectively flood the field with 12 demons if properly positioned. Abraxas' passive, Internal Pacts, also adds psychic damage to the ranged attacks of adjacent Chaos units, while also giving an additional attack to adjacent demons. At the center of a demon circle, or if adjacent to any of his allies, he can help dish out more unblockable damage across the field. Tamachus' only synergy is his psychic damage model to boost Yazgor, Toth, and Abraxas' abilities, while his passive, Arcane Shield, adds a 1-turn shield to a Chaos unit within 2 hexes, prioritizing Thousand Suns members. For the final abilities, Araman pairs extremely well with his Legion. His active, Doombolt, deals 3 psychic hits, evenly distributed to all enemies within 2 hexes, with additional hits being added for each hex on the field that's on fire. This may seem kinda random at first, but Toth's ranged attack and the melee attacks of Abraxas and Tamachus all set the targeted hex on fire, so this is easy enough to max out the damage with. His passive, Psychic Stalk, buffs all attacks that deal fire or psychic damage when the target is on a fire hex. Again, something that's easily fabricated to really lump up the damage to a single target. While they were one of my least favorite factions when they first released, I have come to appreciate just how excellently this faction works together. It's a strong contender for the best synergy. And so now we come down to a fairly quick rundown of where everyone ranks. We have 18 factions here, so I'll just list them in the order that I feel they should be based on how well they work together within their faction. I'll be going lowest to highest. So in 18th place we have the Astra Militarum. The next 5 can all be tied for 17th place, but I'll go with the Black Legion, Sororitas, Necrons, Space Wolves, and World Eaters. The next 3 are also tied for 12th place. We have the Aeldari, Orkz, and Black Templars. The next 3 are also tied for 9th place, being the Ultramarines, Death Guard, and the Blood Angels. And who would have guessed the next 3 are also tied for 6th, those being the Adeptus Mechanicus, Tyranids, and the Tau. Now we get to the big 3. In 3rd place we have the Dark Angels. Going into this, I always knew the Dark Angels would be near the top, but I honestly was not expecting them to not be at least 2nd. They have a lot of great strengths that work well off each other based on positioning and Overwatch buffs for a faction where 3 units technically have Overwatch. They are great as an anti-chaos faction and are great for shutting down highly aggressive players in faction wars, but I just feel that the Genestealers and the Thousand Suns just had a slight leg up on them. In my 2nd place, we have the Thousand Suns. That's right, you may not like it, or you may have expected it, but the Sons of Magnus are our runners-up for this competition. They are a summon-heavy faction, much like the Genestealers, who we'll get to in just a moment, but that summon spam is what puts them above the Dark Angels. The Dark Angels are very powerful in their own right, but their strength of Overwatch is fairly quickly mitigated when they are flooded by potentially 12 demons and taking massive stacks of damage thanks to Araman and Toth doubling down on the damage from Yaz, Abraxas, and Tamachus. Their summon spam is, however, highly dependent on map layout and positioning to maximize summon capability, which is why the Genestealer Cults are at the top of this list. They are physically weaker than the 2 factions below them, with the exception of Judd and the Pattermine, but they don't exactly stay dead. They are able to summon massive amounts of units to swarm their enemies, and each of these summons is also able to respawn on a decoy. These decoys are able to be spawned en masse by Isaac, individually by Zebia, who can also turn them into a summon. When any of these units die, except for the Pattermine, they spawn a beacon, and whenever the Pattermine kills a target, a decoy is created. The Pattermine, as previously mentioned, also has the ability to turn all adjacent decoys into one of the strongest summons from this faction. In a head-to-head, I feel the GSC beats the Thousand Suns for a few reasons, but most notably is Judd. Her active, especially with how the summons work for Abraxas, can easily see her clearing not only 5 summons at a time, but also Abraxas himself at the center of the summoning circle in a single move. That severely cuts down on the once-and-done summons of the Thousand Suns, while the GSC members are all able to respawn once each time. Not to mention the GSC has a medic where the Sons of Magnus do not. And so that is my insanely long rundown of all the faction synergies in Warhammer 40K Tacticus. As I said in the beginning, this is basically an overview of which factions work best with themselves for faction wars. Of course, you can win with any faction when you play properly, but some factions are just inherently better at working with themselves than others. So, again, sorry for the massive length of the video, but if you stuck around, you are a real trooper and you deserve a badge of honor. If you found this guide helpful or fun or entertaining in any way, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more Tacticus content. I'd like to thank my lovely Patreon patron Zaintor for his continued monthly support, and I encourage you to join him if you like what I do here. At the very least, you know that you'll be acknowledged in every single video. Also, if you did watch the whole thing in one sitting, please let me know in the comments. So, until next time, I've been Doodleman149, and remember to purge the heretics, suffer not the Xenos to live, and reclaim the galaxy for the Emperor!